Thank you for coming back for section 13. We're going to wrap up the conversation on reasonable care and the importer's responsibilities by rolling through this topic-specific approach and hitting on the recommendations that CBP makes within each topic to exercise reasonable care. We're going to start out with product valuation and CBP recommending the following. Bearing in mind that valuation is related to putting a value on the goods so we can help to determine what amount of duties, if any, are owed to the government. First sub-bullet, CBP is recommending to have established and reliable procedures in place to ascertain the price actually paid or payable. We've seen this term a number of times. We defined it, talked about it. It's going to continue to come up. As a quick reiteration, the price paid or payable is the FOB price of the merchandise we're buying overseas, but including things like sales commissions, royalties, assists, etc. We have some good examples of that moving forward. CBP makes a point of saying that valuation is all about having procedures around determining the price actually paid or payable. Second sub-bullet, also have a clear understanding of the true meaning of Incoterms rules and how they impact the price paid or payable. We all know that we've talked about Incoterms rules many times. They play a role here because if we are including international transportation charges and the price actually paid or payable, basically, we're inflating the declared value of our merchandise and we'll end up paying more duties than we should. More on that in upcoming slides. It's important to bring that to the table. Third sub-bullet, know if an overseas purchase involves those rebates, commissions, royalties, or assists that we spoke of just a moment ago. And always make good use of cross for similar valuation scenarios, be it by ruling number. Certainly this would be a good time to use an HTS number that we're thinking about using to find rulings specific to valuation on that number. That's a good example of how to use cross. Some others, continuing with valuation, consider getting a ruling or rulings specific to an item's valuation. We said this previously. We can use cross for historical perspective and support. We can also be proactive in the present and get our own rulings. Second sub-bullet, more tactical in nature, be sure to have a complete set of transaction-specific documents available for CBP review. And CBP has every right to ask to see hard copy documentation. In fact, it's called a documentation review. Regardless of the nature of the import, and we know this from previous conversations, the three docs right out of the gate are going to be the commercial invoice, the packing list, and the transport document. They could be asking for other things. A certificate of origin, for example, if we're claiming status for a free trade agreement. At the very least, it's going to be those three docs that we've talked so much about already. Similar to what we saw in previous slides, consider using the services of an expert in establishing a product's valuation, customs broker, customs attorney, etc. We're switching things up a little bit on this slide. Now we're talking about specific to country of origin and product marking. We've moved away from valuation. Now we're talking about country of origin and product marking. CBP recommends the following reasonable care procedures. Have a reliable process in place that ensures accurate country of origin information is explicitly stated on all entry documents. Country of origin is a big deal from a documentation perspective, but also from a product perspective, on the packaging, on the product itself, stating the country of origin. We see that in our second sub-bullet, to not only have document-related information about country of origin, but to maintain verifiable procedures that assure actual products are marked upon entry with the correct country of origin. Last sub-bullet here, consider a ruling for product-specific country of origin marking requirements. We've been through 3 or 4 subjects now: product description, classification, valuation. Now we're on country of origin and product marking, but we see the same consistency in the way that CBP approaches reasonable care. consider using the services of an expert. Consider getting your own ruling. These are consistent methodologies that can be used. We're still on the topic of country of origin and product marking. What else does Customs recommend? Have processes in place that clearly instruct offshore suppliers on country of origin marking requirements. This is a really good recommendation because what it's saying is that we as the importer can have all kinds of procedures in place about country of origin on documents, country of origin on products. If we don't share those with our vendors, we're going to have a big problem because they're the ones that are creating the documents. They're the ones that are making the product. We have to share that information with our overseas vendors, and we have to have a process and procedure in place to do just that. Second sub-bullet, know how imported goods are made from the acquisition of raw materials to finished goods, by whom and where. This actually ties back to the module we saw so many modules ago on sourcing and working with vendors to establish bills of material that contain specific raw materials that go into the finished goods we're buying. To ascertain if our vendors are using subcontractors. If they are those subcontractors in the same country? This is a really big tie-in back to that other theme of sourcing, now presented in a customs brokerage / reasonable care context. And of course, last sub-bullet, consider using the services of an expert when dealing with country of origin and or product marking questions. In this slide, we're starting to wrap up this reasonable care importer responsibility discussion by covering some miscellaneous topics that CBP also offers suggestions and recommendations for. These recommendations include: be sure to have procedures in place that cover reasonable care specific to partner government agencies, those PGAs that can be so important to us as an importer depending on what we're importing. The Food and Drug Administration related to the importation of beauty products and makeup. Reasonable care extends to partner government agencies. It's not just about CBP. We have to have a much broader frame of reference in terms of reasonable care specific to these PGAs. Second sub-bullet, have measures in place to determine if any imported items are subject to anti-dumping or countervailing duties. You will recall that we defined anti-dumping and countervailing duties during our definitions section. So we know that anti-dumping is a scenario where a country, industry, or specific company is selling into a market, the U.S. in our case, at below market cost, trying to capture market share, only to drive out all the competition and then raise prices later. That's anti-dumping. That's not allowed. Countervailing duties, as we also will recall, is about a government subsidizing an industry for its exports into the U.S. import market. Depending on what we import, and things change as it relates to anti-dumping and countervailing duties, new products, new countries, new industries are added, we have to have a measure in place to make sure that we're up to date and not subject to anti-dumping or countervailing duties. Last slide in this section, wrapping up some of these miscellaneous topics. If imported products are subject to quota and or visa requirements, have procedures in place that assure compliance with same. Quota and visa are two subjects we haven't talked about much. We'll get to it later in this module. But quota is where the government places a limit on the number of units or dollar value of an imported good coming into the U.S. Historically, around textiles, doesn't have to be just textiles. Could be steel, could be other products as well. And a visa requirement is additional documentation that is required for specific products to be imported into the U.S. Things have changed a bit in the quota/visa world, not as pervasive as it used to be, but certainly something that companies need to be aware of, especially in that steel space, in that textile space. As a miscellaneous topic for reasonable care, it should be considered. And then finally on this slide, have a procedure in place to make sure that the right type of entry is being made, a consumption entry, a temporary import, etc. The next subject in our upcoming section is about types of entries, so not to worry if that's something new. But from a reasonable care perspective, we as the importer have to make sure that we're filing the right kind of entry, because there are a bunch of different ones. That's going to end this section. And as we said a moment ago, upon our return, it's going to be a study of the different types of customs entries.